10 years ago, when I was working in a company with no more than 24 engineers, I brought DevOps thinking into engineering. And we hired our first DevOps engineer, and it took me 2 weeks to explain our continuous delivery pipeline to him. We spent time whiteboarding, reviewing Confluence docs, reading build scripts, and examining Jenkins configuration. And today we're going to unpack this anecdote to see if and how it fits with the experience of most software teams. Hi, I'm Ian Buchanan, and I joined Atlassian a few years after that story. I brought my passion for DevOps and my community, developer community skills to become a developer advocate. Now, I'm currently specialized in partner engineering, which means I get to work with the technology companies on this panel today, and we help fit our products together and make a better continuous delivery tool chain. So before we get into the topic, let's have today's guests introduce themselves and the company that they work for. Simon.
Thank you, Ian. My name's Simon Mabel. I'm the field CTO at Snyk. I've been at Snyk for about 4 years now, in engineering for around 20. And Snyk is a developer security tooling platform.
Joe?
Thanks, Ian. Hi, I'm Joe Wust. I'm the lead cloud architect at software testing startup Mabel. We make testing in the cloud type SaaS solutions. And I've spent the last 5 years building many things, but among them, a lot of deep CI/CD integrations with tools across the industry. And I've become really passionate about testing all the things.
Great. Eddie?
Hi, I'm Eddie Webbinaro. I'm the Director of Solutions Engineering here at CircleCI, which is the world's leadest continuous integration and continuous delivery provider.
So in order to pack this opening anecdote and kind of understand it a little bit better, we have been doing some research inside of Atlassian, really at 2 layers. At the platform layer, we're finding out that the proposition of Atlassian is to break down the kinds of silos that people see in their businesses. So well beyond the technical functions like just dev, sec, and ops, as DevOps is usually cast. And so while today we're going to focus on the continuous delivery piece, we are finding out that businesses really want to unleash productivity by making data flow across specialized tools, not just continuous delivery, and by opening up their data to get insights so that they can grow and evolve. So I think also at the layer of open DevOps, we're doing user research that also suggests that people see this particularly for the continuous delivery tool chains. So similar to my opening anecdote, people are telling us that they don't really understand what their continuous delivery pipelines do. So to be fair, it's not so much that nobody understands anything. It's not that bad. But continuous delivery is something that some people understand some parts of really well. And there's kind of a too few people who understand the whole thing. The impact that we're hearing is that there is a kind of brittle set of pipelines that are out there. So they break and it takes a lot more work than expected to fix. And at the same time, our customers are telling us that their CD pipelines are difficult to change. It takes just a lot of effort to add a new tool or to change tools in the pipeline. So I guess I wonder if folks are seeing the same thing out there. We'll just kind of go around the horn here, maybe starting with Eddie. Do you think teams even understand their pipeline?
Yeah, great question. I think the good news here is that teams, from what I see at CircleCI, are more passionate and engaged with their pipelines, more than ever before. But I do think there's still the aspect of Conway's law, which is the pipelines too often reflect the organization they're coming from. And that often means kind of siloed and individual responsibilities. And across that, I think you have a challenge of trust. And that's the biggest problem you start to see emerge from that. I like to use the phrase automagical in my early days of kind of DevOps because things just kind of happen for you. But I think automagical is actually a silly phrase to look at here because if it really is this misunderstood thing, magic is really cool, but witchcraft is kind of concerning. And if the team doesn't really understand their pipeline, I think that's what leads to a lot of the distrust and uncertainty you see. So when something does go wrong and things aren't working the way you expect them to, it turns into a witch hunt because nobody understands exactly who they're supposed to be working with to go to that next step and try and resolve it, right? It's just about pushing the blame around instead.
Joe, what do you think? Do you also see the same problems? Do people understand their tool chain?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Ian. And very much as Eddie said, I think that our build pipelines are just getting overly complex, and it's generally impacting the visibility that engineers have into these pipelines, and they're feeling overwhelmed. Builds used to be simple years ago with Jenkins. You just compiled your code, you ran your unit tests, and you packaged it. That was it. And the output of that was very clear. It was green, it was red, it passed, it failed. But today, we're putting a lot of extra, value generators and a lot of extra tools into these pipelines. Things like vulnerability scans and credential checks, bill of materials analysis, and looking at your floods of dependencies. And this means that the builds aren't just, red, green anymore. There's actually some subjective interpretation into all the outputs that come out of here. A given build might have like hundreds of findings, perhaps in the security realm. And now an engineer has to decide, does she ship or not? What does it mean? So I think that that's a real challenge of visibility. And that, if developers can't easily, remedy these breaking builds, it also leads to the anti-patterns of, turning off these noisy signals, turning off the things that they don't understand. And we've seen, through customers and others, people ship broken stuff accidentally because they don't really have clarity into what's going on in these builds. And, basically, if you can't see the defects, the software defects in your pipeline, you can't fix them, and your quality that you ship is going to suffer.
Simon, how about you? Do you think you understand this?
I mean, I agree, and with what's been said, and I think one of the core areas of this is that automation has been pushed so much in order to ship quickly, and I think the automation, which has been saving us from those details of every single piece of that pipeline, is also the disadvantage when something goes wrong. As developers and teams tend to be quite distant from those pieces in the tool chain, and as a result, lack that visibility into exactly what's being used, who set that up, and so forth. From the Snyk point of view, the security point of view, developers tend not to always want such a deep level knowledge about anything security wise or testing from a results back from a tool. So very often what you tend to do is you have guardrails or policies that tend to flag when a very specific test fails in a very specific instance. So something that is effectively against your policies. And it's at that stage where someone, looks at this and tries to work out, okay, I didn't even know this was even running. What is this, and how do we fix it, and that kind of thing. So, I would say, in general, in a more modern security development practice, there's a lot of additional education and processes that need to sit around that. And where that doesn't exist, there's sometimes a disjoint between the development teams in that CD pipeline.
Great. Joe, you used a term that I want to pick up on. You talked about an antipattern. Can you explain briefly what is an antipattern?
An anti-pattern is something that has become so infamous that it is the well-recognized way not to do something.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think we have, I think this kind of is a good setup for anti-patterns, because you have a lot of people in this situation. And so many of them are trying to do whatever they can. And sometimes the things that feel like it should solve it don't. And I think this is something that I've seen about CI and CD pipelines, the kind of the habit people have about reacting to this if it becomes brittle is to do it less often. They inadvertently create bigger batches. And by batches, I mean sets of change or like branches. Those can be the physical manifestations of batches. And the bigger they make them, the higher the impact of a merge conflict or configuration drift. And so that means I think the problem takes longer and longer to recover. But other than just like if it hurts, do it more often kind of thinking, I wonder if folks see some other anti-patterns out there. So Joe, maybe you can take us down that path that you opened up there.
Sure. So, one thing we've seen, and this is kind of zooming out a bit, but when we kind of look at this from the big picture, from some of our clients and even internally, we think that sometimes people are getting a little bit lost in the details of, I need to have this in my pipeline, but they're not necessarily, focused on what does this pipeline really do. And so I really think we need to kind of at times zoom out and look at the big picture and not get lost in the specifics, as engineers like us do too often, especially in an industry working where the tools change so quickly. If you know everything about your tool today, you better learn a new tool in 5 years. And so that way, I think sometimes some companies say, I need to have X tool, and they haven't really zoomed out and said, what do they really need at a high level? And they kind of put the cart before the horse a little bit. So we see, in Mabel, some, teams you work with, some savvy teams like, for example, Ritual, that they started by saying, not that we need Mabel or something like that, but they decide what is the quality strategy that they want? What do they want to achieve with their pipelines? How does that map to their business? And then they backfill that with the individual tools and components they're going to use. Specifically, Mabel, we've done the same thing. We decide what are the workflows we want to use, what are the quality gates we need, and then we go and find things that work for that individual group. And we think that this way, your tooling is more likely to stand the test of time, but you're also less likely just to have a bunch of things bolted on in there because some other part of your organization had it and nobody really knew why that's being used.
Simon, how about you? What are you seeing people try out there that might not be working so well?
I think one thing which people very often try by almost like falling into is going back into almost the siloed effect. And I think that one of the reasons why people tend to do that is because you look at a dev team, and that dev team obviously has a huge number of things that they need to achieve in their current sprint, for example. Now, they could either every single one of those spend the time in trying to work out and understand exactly what's happening in those sprints, happening in their pipe, or they go to ask one person who's that expert in that team. And what you tend to fall into the trap of, if you're not careful, is going to that one expert and that person growing into the expertise and them then becoming the go-to expert for that pipe. And then no one else needs to bother learning about that. So you almost like break back into that silo, which is, the thing we want to break from. And it, sometimes it's a culture thing, sometimes it's a laziness thing, but sometimes that's just the way it works.
Yeah, Simon, I think that's kind of funny because in my opening story, I was talking about 10 years ago hiring a DevOps engineer, and
right.
Sometimes that becomes like yet another silo.
Yeah.
Eddie, what else are you seeing out there as anti-pattern?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Joe and Simon have shared already. And it's actually, going back 10 or 15 years, I think we forgot everything we learned with Lean, right? If we look at a process today, we're so focused, like Simon and Joe said, this is my part. I've got to optimize, the security testing piece. I've got to optimize this gate. I've got to optimize this profile. And we stop and take a step back and say, wait a minute, there's an end-to-end process here. So I remember one time when I was an engineer working on a web services team, we thought our process was pretty tight, pretty fast. But we took a day and whiteboarded the end-to-end process to actually get that into the hands of customers. There was 9 teams involved, 66 individual steps, and it took 16 weeks to get it done, right? That wasn't 16 weeks of compiling time or testing time, that was 16 weeks of human process that we had set up that was just not optimized in that end-to-end system. And so that's one of the biggest anti-patterns, right? Is really trying to, like Simon said, take the step out of your silo and really focus on what is the end-to-end value that we're going for. And then I think the other big thing is don't stop there, right? Once you've identified that solution, you need to acknowledge it's really just a hypothesis at that point, right? And so before you go and automate everything now you figured out this perfect recipe, step into it, right? And make sure that you're kind of measuring the impact of each one of these. And just like Simon said, don't let a single person do it. You're just going to create a DevOps wizard or sorceress who then becomes that bottleneck that everyone has to go to. We don't want magic or wizardry, right? We want something that is well known and understood by the entire team. So when something does go wrong, everybody's on it, right? And it can be a mobbing session that's like, yeah, we all know what it's doing and we all know the outcome we want from it and we all understand how it works. And so we're much more empowered to solve this problem and move forward.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. I think in backing away from the hyper specialization, I think I kind of come to remember the agile phrase generalizing specialists, and I think that this is what we're seeing also at that platform or at that kind of common business problem layer that we're trying to address in our platform across products. We think that's a mix of automation, data, collaboration, and extensibility, because we are really acutely aware that we're not the only ones building tools. And I think when we then tie that into the open or into the DevOps world, we really thought hard and wanted to put the word open in front of what we're trying to do with DevOps. So at the end of 2020, we launched some kind of first steps in that direction. We put some metrics into Jira software that help people understand their commit to deploy cycle times and their deployment frequencies. And I think that actually ties into what everybody follows DevOps the way I do, but the DevOps research and assessment has been going on for something like 8 years now, following those 4 metrics, or sorry, 2 of those metrics out of 4 that really indicate team performance. And soon we're moving into an area where we're trying to help people understand the tool chain connections that they have and perhaps point out potential gaps. But I wonder if other, you all have different products from the perspective that you're coming at it. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what's, what you're looking to do to solve this kind of tool chain understanding or visibility problem. So Simon, let's start with you this time. What are some of the trends that you're working towards?
Yeah, so I mean, from our point of view, I think it's really important to you mentioned visibility, and I think invisibility is absolutely core, but it's really, really important that visibility happens at the right place where people expect that to happen. And I think, the pipeline is a fairly kind of long thing from dev all the way through to deployment. And it's about largely understanding where the developer wants that integration, where they want to consume that information first, and what kind of information they want back. Now, I think initially, when you start deploying these different vendors and different products onto a pipeline, it matters how much you ramp that up straight away. You don't want to overwhelm or don't give enough information. And I think this is largely ramping up with, I mentioned guardrails and policies, but changing that per team. You don't have this uber proficient team working on the same policies and guardrails necessarily as a team that is really struggling with their delivery, because one's going to be entirely blocked constantly, the other one isn't going to get that visibility that they need. I think the education is really, really important about what's acceptable and why something can't go through the pipeline, so that there are no surprises. But I think the automation that we mentioned there, I think, is really, really important. And connecting, for example, if we wanted to add, Snyk into Bitbucket, for example, perhaps you do it as a pipe, perhaps you do it as a pull request, and those kind of things. So making that automation there, but providing that visibility as the developer needs. Equally, automation to other things outside of the pipeline. Do we need an automatic JIRA to be raised when something falls over, and how do we connect that in through the APIs and so forth with that? So I think there's a number of things there that we already have, and also that we're continuing to establish.
Eddie, how about you? What is CircleCI up to?
So I think very similarly, you mentioned the DOOR metrics, Ian, and we see a lot of customers are extremely interested in these metrics. They make a lot of sense, and they're an easy thing to measure, and they're a productive thing to act on. And so at CircleCI, we're also exposing those same metrics to customers, and there's been a really warm reception to that. But we see about, I think it's 60 million builds a month that we see at CircleCI. And so if you think about all the data and the kinds of teams and projects and workloads going through that, we can show you, here's your DOOR metrics. But I think teams are kind of wondering, well, is it good? Is that bad? Right. And we've seen, the elite performing teams, it's 10 minutes, less than an hour of recovery, but there's a lot of teams that aren't there. Right. And so we think a really exciting opportunity here is kind of showing customers a benchmark of how they stand against industries of their size, of their framework, of their tooling, but then also using all that data that we have to give them more prescriptive advice, right? So if you want to improve and move a notch up and move a peg up on this ladder, here's some things to consider, right? And so actually using, for teams your size, for languages, the frameworks, the deployment environments, the technologies that you're using, here's things that you might consider, and just using that based on the aggregate data that we have into our environment. So I think that's an exciting opportunity. The other thing I see is that the visibility we're talking about, the pipeline today, that's kind of a dev commits and it stops in production. And I think the big opportunity we see is that the visibility actually extends beyond both of those, right? So we're seeing more and more this use case that changes aren't always coming from a developer's commit. Sometimes changes are becoming because a CVE was published, or the upstream, Docker image your platform is using has been updated, and you need to respond to that. On the tail end, how confident are teams with the impact or outcome of their changes, right? So you did that code change last week. Was it a good change? Was it a bad change? What's the business impact been from it, right? And too many teams, I think, still lack that kind of visibility and understanding. So another thing we're really excited about is how can we move to this idea of continuous validation, right? We are constantly validating change wherever it's coming from, all these potential upstream triggers, as well as then the actual outcome on your business. Not just, hey, it got deployed into production and it's green, But as we know, non-prod testing doesn't really reflect the production environment anymore, the data sets, the services, the integrations, the users. And so they're actually monitoring the deployment after it goes live, right? Are we seeing the increased retention that we want from our users? Are we seeing an adequate checkout rate from our shopping carts, right? Are we seeing the quote rate the way we want? And if not, let's make the engineering team, the developer team who owns this, let's make them aware of that so that they can respond and react to that and continue to push through this end-to-end process at a higher level. I think that's a really exciting opportunity for some of this visibility across all the different tools in the ecosystem.
Joe, how about Mabel? What do you guys see coming that, or in your product, that helps solve some of this visibility into the pipeline?
Thanks, Ian. I'm so glad that Eddie brought up validation of your build. That's our jam, trying to make sure that the build is a good build. And as I said earlier, we see this flood of signals that's coming from all the pipelines and drowning engineers at some level, overwhelming their limited human ability to parse and make sense of all that build information. As we said a few years ago, it used to be pass-fail, and now we get tons and tons of outputs. And these complex analyses obviously need to have somebody make sense of them, whether it's security analyses or quality analyses. And now we're trying to decide, is this change good to ship? And today the trends we see, especially like in the testing and quality industry, is that tools are starting to try to provide deeper insights, to tell people, engineers, developers, how a change they made in code would have meaningful changes to their application, especially with respect to how a human being would perceive those. That's what we would say is an analog for quality. So for example, is the application faster now because of this change you want to ship? Is it slower? Did your accessibility increase or decrease? And your test coverage, your meaningful test coverage, like the parts of the application your users actually go that we can map, is that increased or decreased? These sorts of more subjective judgments as whether this is really a quality, change that's good to ship. And to handle these additional insights, we see a lot of vendors, starting to aggregate these insights for visibility into single panes of glass. So you don't have to go into that pipeline to find stuff, to kind of short circuit, those workflows people have to figure out A then B then C, go from tool to tool, as Simon pointed out, trying to bring that into a single pane of glass to help them make those easy decisions, so you can see your security posture from the top down, such as with Snyk, or the quality perspective, from the top down, as Mabel does. And just as important, we think that aggregating these insights also makes them available, via APIs. So both humans and machines can learn. And in the long term, our long-term dream with this is just to have more of those feedback loops where now, we are teaching the machine is learning, and those pipelines can start making these routine decisions for you. Like, should this release be blocked? Should it be rolled back? And do all this automatically to really, empower people to get more done.
Thanks, Joe. I think as we march now towards closing things out, I'd like to make this some real practical advice for the audience. So I'm going to ask each person, what's the one thing that you would suggest people do? And I'd like to, just kind of the speed round. So let's just kind of keep it to what is the one thing somebody, where do they go? What do they try? What do they do? So let's start with Simon. Simon, what's your most practical advice to do about this?
So my most practical advice would be documentation. And there's two things here: documentation about what exists in the pipeline, but more importantly, because these pieces of documentation can get stale quite quickly, more importantly, documentation of how people can understand it for themselves. So maybe it's a Bitbucket pipeline YAML file or something like that. Whatever it is, understanding how they can go to it, understanding how they can learn what configuration there is to run, or the pipe ordering, what the thresholds for test pass fail is. Documentation is very important for me.
Joe, what's your advice?
Sure, Ian. And simple, really try to quantify and maximize the value generated by your pipelines. I challenge folks to try to pick 2 or 3 metrics that you want to drive your pipeline. Choose those metrics, try to map them to business goals. And now you can say that I'm delivering value with these improvements I'm making to my pipelines. And secondly, as a part of that, I would just note that some things you can do in that vein would be try to optimize your pipelines for performance. people, they can only go so fast. They're really hard to find these days, but machines are very cheap in the cloud. Parallelism is very cheap. Throw more compute at your builds, save literally save the lives of your engineers. And secondly, don't be afraid to cut off bits of your, pipelines that aren't really working for you. Be like a gardener and prune things back. So once you're quantifying stuff and you can say, what does this do? It doesn't do anything for me. Comment it out. See if anybody squeals about it. If not, you've just, again, saved more time, and optimized for your engineering workflow.
Eddie, what do you hope people start doing tomorrow?
Well, they've always said what gets measured gets managed. And I think that's a little bit of a dated, but I think empowered teams today are the ones that are productive and impactful teams, right? They want to own the impact. And so I think the most practical thing to do is have the conversation about why. What are we trying to accomplish as an organization? What is the impact that we as an organization are hoping to achieve by this change? Because if you have truly professional people, they want autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So set that clear goal for them and let them achieve the results in a really impactful way with all the knowledge and insight that just we as a leadership team can't have, right? We need to trust those individual contributors to make the good decisions, and make good decisions. They need to know what they're trying to accomplish.
So I'm going to make my call to action just about this conference itself. So if you're watching virtually, be sure to check out the keynote. There are some points in there that will explain more about what we're doing in terms of platform and open DevOps and what those will manifest as features. If you're in person, even better, please check out the platform booth. You can learn more about what we're doing around automation, data collaboration, and extensibility. Or come by the Integration Hub, where I will be talking about what we're doing in terms of partner integrations. I'll be spending most of my time there with these partners and some others. And I would definitely look forward to talking to you. And then I just want to thank the panel. It's been so good to talk to you. It's wonderful to get domain experts together like this and have really solid conversations. So Simon, Joe, Eddie, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye.